Good morning. I'm going to get started. As you know, this room gets very busy. We're quite tight for time. Welcome, everyone, to this Amnesty International press conference, where we're going to present an overview of a report that we've just launched today entitled Extraction Extinction. This report exposes the likely scale and depth of human rights harm caused by fossil fuel infrastructure to the communities that live nearby. To show scale, it includes a global mapping of current and planned fossil fuel infrastructure that was undertaken by Better Planet Lab. And to show depth, it includes case studies of specific fossil fuel projects in Brazil, Canada, and several other countries in the Americas and Africa. We'll hear first from Agnès Callamard, Secretary General of Amnesty International, who will present a global overview, followed by Jurema Wernick, the Director of Amnesty Brazil, Alexandre Anderson, who represents a group of artisanal fishers from Rio de Janeiro, and Kumi Naidoo, President of the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty Initiative. We'll have time for questions at the end, and we will show a QR code where you can access the report. Agnès.
Thank you very much, Marta. Before presenting the report, I wanted to pay my respect to all the environmental human rights defenders that are at COP, that cannot come to COP. And I also wanted to remind us all of the Ogoni 9. 30 years ago, they were executed for defending the Niger Delta against international oil giants. Their trials was unfair. They were condemned to death and they were executed. For Amnesty International, who at the time was seeking to protect them, the Ogoni 9 and Kier Sarowiwa are the inspiration behind a lot of the work that we are doing, including the work that we have been doing around climate injustice. And I just want us not to forget the Ogoni 9, because justice has not been delivered to them and to their family. They were pardoned by the government this year. This is the last thing that were required because they committed no crimes. Their only crimes was to defend their land against the oil industry. And their fight continues, and this is why we're here today. This is why there is a COP here. This is why we are expecting COP30 to deliver a strong message regarding fossil fuel phase out, because we do not want more Ogoni 9 to die for defending their land. And this report is demonstrating why we need to keep fighting. We have been able to partner with an organization called Better Planet Laboratory. They're not here today, but I want to acknowledge the fantastic work that they have done with us. And with them, we are producing a report that is the first global estimate of how many oil, gas, and coal sites are currently around the world and how many people are affected around the world. We are showing that more than 18,300 oil, gas, and coal sites are currently distributed across 170 countries. That's just to give you a sense of what we are confronting right now. At least 2 billion people, a quarter of the world's population, live within 5 kilometers of those infrastructures. At least 463 million live within 1 kilometer of those sites. More than 520 million children live within 5 kilometers of those infrastructures. In addition to those sites, there are 3,500 new sites that are being programmed or are under development that will affect 135 million more people. These are the numbers. That is what we are confronting when we talk about fossil fuel. It is about climate injustice. It is also about right to health, right to a clean environment, right to food, right to your land. All of those sides are deeply affecting human rights now, past, current, and future. This ever-expanding industry is endangering billions of lives, irreversibly altering the climate system and destroying critical natural ecosystem. There is plenty of evidence proving that proximity to those sites elevates risk of cancer, cardiovascular illness, adverse reproductive outcome, anxiety, depression. It is driving loss of livelihood and traditional ways of life in those communities that live nearby. And the people we have spoken with for the purpose of the report told us or described what is happening as a form of cultural or economic pillage. In addition, this industry is responsible for attacks on human rights defenders and environmental defenders. The industry leads to systemic patterns of exclusion, disenfranchisement, and violations of the communities and of human rights defenders. We have interviewed dozens. I have met many people living near those sites, and those fighting the sites tell us how much threat they are confronting, how much attacks they are facing. They tell us about state using lawfare to criminalize their activities to defend their land, to defend their right, to defend their livelihood. This is also what this industry, what our dependence, what our obsession with fossil fuel is responsible for. Human rights violations on a massive scale. We are presenting those findings here at COP to warn of the current harm, to warn of the immense damage that the fossil fuel obsession is doing to many peoples, and to warn against what they are going to do to future generations. The age of fossil fuel must end now. It is a major source of human rights violations. It may be one of the main sources of human rights violations, historically speaking. We have identified some of the industries in that report. There are far more than Shell, TC Energy, Petrobras, and Woodside Energy that are mentioned there. These are the object of that report. I want to invite you all to read the report, but understand that there are far more industry that are responsible for these massive human rights violations. What we are calling for is included in the report. We need international investigation into the violations taking place in those areas. We need those companies to take responsibility for the damage they are creating now and for the damage they have created, such as Shell in Nigeria, which is running away from the problems and leaving the people to have to deal with the aftermath of their exploitation. And we want an end to fossil fuel obsession. We need a treaty to put an end to it so that the process is fair, the process allows for those that are on the front line of the fight to be able to have their voice heard. We will have more speakers talking about the fossil fuel treaty, so I won't get there. But the call to the COP30 leaders is to keep people, not profit, not power, not greed, at the heart of the negotiation, and to commit to a full, a fast, a fair, and fully funded fossil fuel phase out and just transition, so that all those billions of people who are affected can have a chance for them and for their children. Thank you.
Well, good morning, everyone. I'm Jurema Werneck, the Executive Director of Amnesty International Brazil, and I'll present a little bit the case of the Brazilian case, the situation of Brazil. First, it's important to highlight what Agnes just said. The fossil fuel extraction must end, and must end now, and we need to phase out urgently. In Brazil, we investigated and produced evidence in 2 or 3 territories. One was the Guanabara Bay in Rio. The second one is here in the Amazonia. You know, right now that when the Brazilian government decided to start the process to understand if they could or not explore fossil fuel in the Amazon River. And we investigated there, and also Quilombola communities. And what we saw was a situation in Guanabara Bay. What we saw is a disaster area, you know. We have here Alexandre Anderson, who is one activist and human rights defender, defender of that environment. He will explain more. But we also saw fishermen communities and quilombolas and traditional communities. They are really affected with health, in the health and the environment, in the rights, in the basic rights. They cannot work properly in the traditional way. And plus, they are affected also by violence. Brazil is one of the most dangerous countries to human rights defenders and environmental defenders. And Alexandre is here to tell a little bit how it is to be an environmental defender in Rio and in Brazil. It's really dangerous. Brazil is one of the most dangerous. The people used to be killed, and the people don't receive proper justice. The communities do not receive reparations on the violence. What we saw in this communities was that the environment is degraded. Oh, yes, degraded. Yes, reducing the economic the results of it. The people who live there, they live in poverty. Their communities changed from traditional communities to favelas because of this. We also saw increasing of militarization and the violence in these regions with threats and against environmental defenders. We spoke to different environmental defenders, and they are all under threat. They live in danger. And unfortunately, the authorities do not deserve their rights, do not deserve the security. And plus, the Brazilian government is deciding to continue exploring fossil fuel, and now in the Amazonia. The results that we have, the evidence that we have, shows that is not the good choice. This is not the best choice. This is a way to increase towards the situation of life of many, many people. And what we recommend, we recommend one of the decisions that was taken years ago to the communities to be heard. You know, it's their right to be heard. It's the obligation of the authorities to the dialogue. Brazil has laws, international agreements that defines that the communities must be heard, and that's one of the recommendations that we are presenting. So you see, many years ago, it was decided that they have the right to be heard, but until now, they were not. Here in Amazonia, the people here are saying no to fossil fuel, and the government and the the businessmen, they continue to decide to explore this. We also ask for protection. They are under threat and they need protection, and the authority has the obligation to protect them. And we also need to phase out, as Anies just said, we need to make just transitions, to consider in the lives of the people who live in different parts of the countries. And mostly, we are applying for something that we already know. This report, this brings is more evidence for something that we already know. The exploitation of fossil fuel must end, and we know fossil fuel is poisoning the nature, the environment, and the people. Fossil fuel must stop. That's it. Thank you, and I'll pass this to Alexandre. And he will speak in Portuguese. You need to use this.
Bom dia a todos. Me chamo Alexandre Anderson. Eu sou pescador da Baía de Guanabara, um pescador artesanal. Estou aqui muito honrado pelo convite e sendo ainda porta-voz das comunidades que ainda sobrevivem da pesca artesanal naquela região. E não só daquela região, no Brasil. Nesse momento, estamos participando de um encontro, um seminário internacional em Marajó, bem próximo aqui, onde eu pude mais me atualizar dos impactos do petróleo, do gás, das atividades offshore, não só na Baía de Guanabara, mas em outras regiões, como Espírito Santo, Sergipe, a própria região aqui do Marajó. Inclusive, já há anseios, há muito impacto negativo, já com a possibilidade de exploração nessa área aqui da Amazônia, principalmente o Iapoque. Então, eu vou falar um pouco do que nos aflige, a violência que gera a exploração do petróleo. Quando a gente fala em clima, lá na nossa região, a gente já estávamos percebendo os efeitos das mudanças climáticas, no momento que a gente já estava verificando o grande aumento excessivo de sumiço, de poluentes na nossa região. Nossas marés andaram mudando, os ventos estão mudando. Se viu há pouco tempo aqui no Brasil um tornado, nós já começamos a verificar trombas d'água na nossa região. Nosso pescado está mudando, mas o causador está à nossa frente. Hoje, na Baía de Guanabara, ainda resiste mais de 3.000 famílias de pesca, em comparação a 2.000, que a gente fala que foi o marco negativo da destruição, quando houve um maior vazamento no espelho d'água, um vazamento de óleo na região que foi na Baía de Guanabara, pelo um duto defeituoso de uma empresa petroleira, Petrobras, não mitigado. Então, de lá para cá, a gente vai começar a perceber mudanças. Ali a gente fala que foi o começo do fim. A OMA, ela surge em 2007, inclusive, por conta disso. Naquela região, em vez de se mitigar aquele impacto, se criou outros impactos. Após aquele duto que vinha de uma refinaria, que ainda está lá muito presente, poluindo muito, a de Duque de Caxias, veio o Comperj em 2007, justamente no ano que fundamos a associação com esse viés. Existiam outras organizações, mas um viés, inclusive, audacioso de estar se discutindo a questão dos impactos das atividades no nosso espelho d'água. Somos caiçaras, somos pescadores artesanais, nós fomos invadidos. Uma tal violência, uma violência que começa com a cooptação, que começa com a exclusão social, comunidade sendo jogada contra a comunidade, em detrimento de grana, por questão de recursos temporários, muita mentira, propagandas enganosas. Naquela época nós criamos uma campanha, em 2007, 2008, que a gente não era consultado em audiências públicas. Na verdade, sequer a gente ouviu falar da Convenção 69 da OIT. Porém, a Convenção 69 da OIT, ainda hoje, para nós, é igual ao ar. Porque não se aplica ela nos nossos casos. A gente sabe que existe e não vê. Então, a Convenção 69, hoje, nos tribunais brasileiros, em questão dos pescadores, principalmente, é dúbio o entendimento. Eles acham que a gente não temos tradicionalidade. Sou neto, tataraneto de indígena. Eu sou que pescavam na Baía de Guanabara, Tupinambá. Meu pai não era pescador, meu avô era um caiçara. Nós carregamos ainda aquela tradicionalidade da nossa pesca que ainda existe no nosso território, a cerca de covo, o respeito aos horários, essa tradicionalidade não é. Mas, espantosamente, nossa Baía de Guanabara, há 3 semanas, recebemos o Conselho de Cacique do IAPOC, o CCPIO, recebemos nossa comunidade, ficaram 1 semana com a gente, do dia 13 ao 17 de outubro. Eles foram lá para ver o que é esse petróleo que já está chegando na região deles, que já está cometendo violações, já existem caciques ameaçados, existe cacique recebendo cooptações, sendo cooptados, e eles viram a destruição. Aquilo... Vai terminar? Então, dentro desse contexto, a gente está hoje vindo aqui para denunciar e agradecer por a Anistia ter ido esse ano lá. Foi em 4 regiões, foi na região do Complexo da Maré, onde existe uma comunidade muito importante, onde que a saudosa Marielle viveu e construiu uma base ali, e foi numa região de São Gonçalo, foi numa região de uma praia centenária chamada Tubiacanga, e recebeu alguns liderança nossa, e eu creio que esse relatório vai ser muito importante para mostrar que, além dos impactos ambientais, o que as violações traz nessa exploração desordenada, sem respeito às comunidades tradicionais e à vida do ser humano. E obrigado.
Obrigado. I want to first, on behalf of the Fossil Fuel Treaty, extend a very, very strong word of appreciation to our friends and colleagues at Amnesty International for this very important report. We can only hope that this report finally puts to bed the idea that there is something called development and there's something called environment. For far too long, this polarity has actually stopped us from doing that which is correct. To counter this global industry with a global playbook takes a global movement. And on behalf of the 4,000 civil society organizations that have endorsed and participate in advocating for a fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty, on behalf of the 17 governments that are leading the effort to get a binding treaty for us to phase out of fossil fuels, including, by the way, 3 fossil fuel exporting countries, Colombia, Pakistan, and Timor-Leste, and behalf of the faith communities that are leading the fight now to address the phase out of fossil fuel, we welcome this report wholeheartedly. The team at the Fossil Fuel Treaty takes comfort right now that we have momentum that is growing on a daily basis. We had a decision by the International Court of Justice just 6 or so weeks ago, sending a clear message that all that we have been campaigning for in terms of phasing out fossil fuels is valid, is correct, and so on. We also got a decision from the IUCN, the largest multi-stakeholder forum in the environmental sector, where 80% of the governments endorsed the idea of the treaty. So right now, in addition to the leadership that Colombia has provided, you will hear announcements this week, if you've not already heard it, that in April next year, we will have the first, Colombia is leading and we are supporting, the first international diplomatic conference for the phase out of fossil fuels. It's high time that we recognize that for 30 years, what we have been doing is we've been mopping up the floor and treating the symptoms of the problem without turning off the tap. Let's be very clear and say it over and over again, that the primary cause of the climate emergency is our addiction and our dependency on fossil fuels. 86% of what drives climate change is fossil fuels. So to this COP here today, we say, if you cannot come out after 2 weeks with a clear statement that you are going to support a roadmap for the phase out of fossil fuels, then you are deluding yourself that you are addressing the urgency of the moment that we find. And to my brother and all the folks here in Brazil who are saying We talk about this being the COP of truth. We talk about this being the COP of the indigenous peoples. But if the indigenous peoples across the world and here in Brazil have been the primary protector of biodiversity, are now facing immense repression. Just to give you a statistic to make the human rights connection strongly, according to Global Witness, every week, on average, 4 environmental activists are getting killed as a result of standing up against the fossil fuel industry. So I want to just bring in the words of the Colombian president when he endorsed and threw his full weight behind the fossil fuel treaty. President Petro said, "Today we face an immense confrontation between fossil capital and human life, and we must choose a side. Any human being knows that we must choose life. I have no doubt which position to take between fossil capital and life." So let me end by saying that oil, coal, and gas are weapons of mass destruction. They are the poisons that are driving our destruction. And I will end with the unscripted comment that today, the leaders of the fossil fuel industry occupy the same moral equivalent position that in a different era that controlled the so-called slave industry. They have power, they have influence, they have access to unlimited amounts of resources, and they constantly say to us, you cannot continue unless we do what they say. So thank you once again to Amnesty for their leadership in this report, and we hope to campaign together with them to make sure this report gets the maximum visibility as possible. Thank you.
Thank you to the panelists. And just to let all the press know, everyone on this panel is available for interviews after the press conference. Will be out in the hallway. And please download the press kit. Thank you.